Welcome everybody, it's Valerie Ling, clinical psychologist, director, founder for the Centre for Effective Living, coming live to you today with a very good friend of mine. Just going to try to invite her there, Tess Crawley. Yes, with a very good friend of mine, Dr Tess Crawley, whom I'm actually going to invite in. Okay, I'm pretty sure that we will see Tess emerge very soon, but just as an introduction to the section, Tess is a clinical psychologist and forensic psychologist who is located in, something's dinging, approve, add Tess Crawley in person. All of our interactions have actually been through Facebook, but she has, hey Tess!
Hey Val, how are you?
I'm very well, Tess. Thanks for joining us.
That's all right. Thanks for having me. I probably should move back a little bit. I feel like you're there we go. There we go.
I'm just saying that we've never actually physically met, Tess,
I
have we?
know. No, I don't think we have. No, I feel like we have met thousands of times though.
No, but we are kindred spirits, Tess. I think we are kindred spirits. Tess and I fraternize in social media groups, various groups. I think we could be the chattiest ones of the people in the groups. I often feel like we're sitting at the back of the class, just kind of bouncing with each other. But Tess, hi Martha, thanks for joining us. Now, I actually picked up a book in the library, Peak Performance. I must get the book, written by Stolberg and Magnus. I just happened chance to that on it on the weekend. Picked it up because the cover looked good, to be honest, and started reading and couldn't put the book down. And if you're watching from the Centre for Effective Living community, this was actually featured in our client newsletter. And of course, because my interest is in burnout, when I read this book, I was thinking, oh my word, why have I not heard about some of the things that are shared in this book? And so I put it out there to some of my friends, and Tess was one of the first ones to actually pick it up and get an audiobook on it. Is that right?
Yeah. I've been listening to it in the car.
And subsequently, Tess actually did a vlog yesterday about the concept of rest and just some of the things that struck her. And I said, look, would you hop on live with me and do a segment together on rest? But before that, Tess, tell us a little bit about yourself. Where are you? What are you doing?
Oh, where
What's
am I?
your
What am I
work?
doing? Okay, so I'm based in Tasmania. So I'm based in Hobart. I have a private practice here. We have a head office in Hobart and an office in Launceston in the north of the state. We do rural outreach all down the east coast of Tasmania to some very isolated communities, farming communities, coastal communities, some very beautiful parts of Tasmania. We're very lucky. Our practice has obviously an interest in rural mental health, but also perinatal mental health. And I guess this last year or so, as the practice has grown, I have also been allowed, I guess, more time to focus on a special interest area of mine, which is mentoring other psychologists. So we've always had students in the practice, and now I'm branching into, more and more work with more experienced psychologists and mentoring them in their goals and dreams and interesting areas that they want to move into. So it's a great passion, it's a great interest area, and I guess it merges nicely with what you're talking about that interest you have with burnout avoidance. I find it really fascinating to observe the signs and the risk factors associated with burnout, and stepping in and doing what I can to go, oi, what are you doing? You need to pull back. So that's where I'm at the moment.
Brilliant. Hi, Melissa. Thanks for joining us. So I think that's where we have a joining at the moment is, I'm big on burnout prevention. I want to see a world without burnout. And of course, if you look at the 3 areas of burnout, one of the areas is emotional exhaustion. So I'm tapping into your wisdom here, Tess, in 2 areas. One is your passion to mentor professionals and leaders, particularly in the helping professions. And secondly, tapping into your interest in perinatal depression and anxiety, where I think parents in that stage of life can also experience emotional exhaustion and fatigue. So first up, as a professional, Tess, why do we actually need to be taught to rest? I mean, shouldn't that just come naturally? Don't we all just put up our feet at the end of the day and just rest?
I think you should think that that would come naturally. We all should think that that would come naturally. But I think in psychology in particular, I've noticed, I will talk about psychology because it's my profession. I try really hard to say mental health professionals, but I know in particular with psychology, it's a very competitive funnel that students enter. So I think that part of our training actually trains out any complacency is the word that's coming to mind, but it's not quite what I mean. But that ability to step back and put your feet up and think it'll be okay is trained out of us. So as you know, Valerie, I mean, psychologists, my first year of undergraduate training, I think there were 400 first year students. We competed. And in first year, I knew I was heading for a PhD. That was, my eyes were on the prize. I went to uni as a mature age student, so I knew exactly where I was at, what I was aiming for. So there were 400 students in first year competing for 24 honours places, competing for, I think it was 12 postgrad places. So out of 400 students, we knew only 12 of us were going to make it. And for various reasons, some great students don't go on to complete their studies. It's not necessarily a sign of their capacity to be a great psychologist. Life gets in the way sometimes. So I think our training trains us to be competitive, trains us to be driven and ambitious and all of those sorts of things that might have already been lying there dormant, but that training really lifts those out. So then once you're a professional and you've got continuing professional development obligations, rules around professional practice, rules around Medicare compliance, so many rules around how we practice as professionals that it keeps us on edge all the time. And we do feel, I think, and certainly with the clinicians that I talk to, there's a lot of fear. There's a lot of fear that there are too many balls that we can drop if we're not careful. So we feel vigilant. And so that stepping back and resting and think it'll be okay doesn't happen. We don't trust enough our own judgment. We don't trust our training enough either.
Yeah, so I think what I'm getting from you is a sense that our instincts as human beings to rest gets overridden as professionals because there's a real fear that we're going to drop the ball. There's probably a bit of a guilt too that if you don't keep going, like if you actually stop, you might be negligent somehow.
And
that probably too that the idea of rest becomes counterintuitive to productivity. Which is where I think the book is very interesting, Tess. It actually says that we need to rest to be productive. We actually need to stop.
That's exactly right. Yeah, that's exactly right. I think in my video the other day, I was talking about the example. I used a couple of examples from the book. I'm not as far into it as you are, by the way, Val. But the one that really struck me. Oh, good. I'm nowhere near finished. But there was a competitive runner. She was doing okay at, I guess, teenage kind of level. But she decided where she wanted to be with her competitive running, got herself a coach, committed to high altitude training, blitzed the field, and continues to run competitive into her 40s and continues to not necessarily win every race that she goes in, but she certainly does beat competitors half her age. And I think she's written a book and talks very much about the balance in her training schedule between training and resting. And in her mind, the rest is as important as the training, the hard work. And in the book, they talk about that in all realms of life. They use a lot of athletics examples, but they're talking about work as well. And they're talking about, you need to work hard, but you also need to work easy. So you need to find a balance between the tough jobs and the easier jobs, and a balance between taking a break when you know you're about to be hitting that time of your day when you get that dip, that exhaustion. or that time of the year even,
And,
when you know.
yeah, that training schedule test too is basically founded on the idea that you work hard, then you actually need to recover.
Yeah.
We actually need to help our mind and our bodies to go into a phase where it's not doing, it's resting, so that it's recovering and building all of the, in the case of athletes, building the physical muscles. In the case of you and I, it's also restoring our emotional well-being and our cognitive resources. Which brings it, I think, to the personal realm, because some of the viewers may not be professionals, they may be parents or just people going about their daily living. Yep. So about last year, Tess, a friend of mine, Cecily Patterson, I'm going to take you with this one because she doesn't know just how important she was in this journey of mine. I was actually feeling exhausted sometime last year. I wasn't sleeping well. I was doing everything in my capacity and power to actually figure that out. And you know what? I put it up on my Facebook page saying that, feeling really exhausted. I think I'm going to need another coffee to prop me up. I'm up to 3 now. Looks like I'll have to go for 4. And Cecily just wrote one line and said, yes, I used to do 3 espresso, strength coffees. She actually just wrote and says, is that what you actually need? Do you actually need the coffee? And I said, well, what do you mean? She said, why don't you try a nap instead? It's like, oh, all right. Yeah. But, subsequently what I've actually done, Tess, is I no longer drink espresso strength coffees. 20 years I've relied on coffee to keep me going, and I've stopped it. And when I actually stopped, I actually started to relearn my rest cues. When I needed to sit down, for example, the down zones in my afternoon when I'm not quite as productive, and so I needed to do something mindless. But I had been so out of touch in my personal life with my rest cues. Forget about sleep, like night sleep, but just throughout the day. Yeah. I wasn't eating, I wasn't drinking what I needed, I wasn't sitting down to stop. I mean, do you encounter that in your work with parents? Do you find having children, you're just constantly on the go and you feel like you're not resting, the guilt not to rest?
Yeah, I think most new parents in particular will relate to the image of their house littered with cold cups of tea. So, the cup of tea is the symbolic gesture of, it's like you with the coffee. The cup of tea is the symbolic gesture of I'm going to sit down and have a rest, but I never get to sit and stay and finish the cup of tea. When I'm talking with new parents and particularly with new dads, and the dads are so frustrated because they're so used to being able to do something and fix something and they don't know what to do with themselves to be helpful. I often say to them, do what you can to keep her glued to the chair while she finishes her cup of tea. Do everything else while she's finishing her cup of tea, because those are rare moments when she gets to finish those. Similarly, I remember in the 90s, I guess, 90s, early 90s, when the smoking laws changed, and there's this big uproar in the union movement around smoko. So the smokers would get to go outside and have a rest, i.e. a cigarette, and the non-smokers didn't have the same opportunity to go outside, because the smokers previously could have smoked at their desk probably. And so all of a sudden there was a stark contrast between a sector of the working community that could step outside for a break. I think parents in particular, our needs of our children, they do come first. That's a reality. They're reliant on us. They're vulnerable. And then over the course of their childhood, that becomes ingrained as a habit. So, do I find time to go to the gym? No. Do I want to? Yes. Did I open my big mouth and say I would? Yes. Have I? No. No. So life gets in the way, and kids have needs, and parenting is a lot of putting yourself second, and that includes that time for rest. My kids are now of an age where I can explain to them that their bedtime is also linked to my bedtime, in terms of I need some rest time before I go to bed as well. So they're starting to understand that evening process is it's not just all about them being sent off to bed, it's also about me having downtime and resting too. But for parents of really little kids, there's no two-way in that. You know, it's all about the needs of the kids, and there's not that scope for explaining why mummy needs to sit down and have a rest, or why daddy can't play football at the moment with them in the backyard.
Yeah. And again, it's that thing of when you're in that role as a parent, there's the expectation you have of yourself, there's the guilt if you stop. And so we override those natural cues when we actually do really need to rest. And instead we take on the running wheel. You know, we just keep moving, don't we?
Yeah.
And without that rest, you're probably not restored back to optimal productivity or optimal ways of doing things, or just even fresher creative ways.
Yeah.
So finally, Tess, I'm wondering if you had any words of wisdom. Let's say not quite yet a psychologist, not quite yet a parent, but, you know, kind of starting out, trying to make sure that what you're doing with your health and your mental well-being is on a good standing, solid ground. What would you say would be? I'm putting you on the spot here. We didn't talk about this.
I know. That's
Tess. How do we regain that, Tess? How do we relearn that that need to rest and making it routine and part of our rhythm? What are your thoughts?
Oh, look, I think we need to get more. Look, we use the word mindfulness really loosely in Western culture, and psychology has picked up mindfulness. And I'm really mindful that the word mindfulness is bandied about a little bit too much. You can buy Star Wars mindfulness colouring in books and so on. But I've spent a little bit of time in Japan over the last 12 months. I've been over there twice. And what I noticed in Japan is that there is an ingrained sense of mindfulness. They're very present in their interactions with you and with each other and with themselves. And I think that having skills around mindfulness, being able to tune in to where you're at right now, starting to know yourself really well, knowing what's going on around you, knowing what cues your body is giving you, you can start to hear a little bit better what's going on and what you need. So I know with clients with anxiety, for example, first thing I teach them is some, mindful breathing techniques so they can start to detect when an anxiety episode is building because they notice it in their body. And I think the same holds true for just knowing ourselves and knowing our needs in the moment, but also putting some really clear boundaries in place. So what is my family routine, or what is my work routine? Where are the moments that I can carve out, even if it's just sitting on your front step with a cup of tea? And I use this analogy a lot because it's what I do. Taking a cup of tea out to the front step and sitting on the front step in a little pool of sunshine is my idea of 5 minutes of heaven. And we don't do it. We don't carve out those 5 minutes when we get them. And I think we really need to just be mindful of that and make sure we're doing that as often as we need to. And make it your time. Have a favourite chair or a favourite spot in your garden or a favourite corner of your office, not at your desk preferably, where you can just go and be for 5 minutes and just, quieten that down, quieten that noise.
Yeah, absolutely. We've got a few people watching.
I know.
Frank says, a lovely topic. Monique is here with us. Daniel as well. Feel free to shoot through any questions if you have any. One of the things that I picked up on your blog towards the end, Tess, was we were actually thinking about how do you actually schedule the routines of rest. And you were saying, I have to actually reflect on that myself, you were saying, because do I rest when the kids are on school holiday? Is that my season of rest? Yeah. Well, funnily enough, when I do work in burnout with professionals, that's actually one of the first things we nut out is the yearly calendar. Yeah. Nutting out when are your peak seasons and making sure that you have a rest before and a recovery after. Yeah. Nutting out when are the family peak seasons and then making sure you have the rest and the recovery. So I reckon, without those sort of scheduled, intentional awareness of when your peak periods are as a professional and as well as your personal life, and making sure you have rest for the before. You've got to pedal up the hill, so you need to rest.
Yep.
And then the recovery after, we're actually likely not to do those things because we feel guilty.
Yeah.
So the first thing, I suppose, is, you know, putting it down in the calendar. And I also like what you said. I too, in my own personal space, have got a space at home where it's carved out for rest. I like that space. And often after the hurry-burry of the morning,
Yeah.
I will sit, because now that I don't have caffeine to prop me up, I actually realize that my brain is scrambled.
Yeah. Yeah.
I've got a bazillion things buzzing through my head. And anxiety, you know, did I send them off with the right uniform, or, oh my gosh, was their lunch, did I actually remember to put lunch? And I've just got to sit, you know, in those high transition moments, even in the day, to, as you said, to actually just be aware of when those moments are and then sit and be mindful of them.
Yep.
And then our body gets used, I suppose, to rest cues again, and recognizing when you need it.
Yep.
What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I agree. And I think that people who are in the habit of daily or regular, at least, meditation or yoga or mindfulness practice will be probably nodding along sagely with what you're saying, that, you know, your body, the more you tune in, the more you hear. And I think the more regularly you practice that skill, it's like training a muscle. You know, the more you practice that skill, the more you'll start to hear. I think another variable is the pressure on us around work and the obligations. I think as mental health professionals too, when you've got back-to-back clients booked in for weeks in advance. I know a lot of the clinicians on my team are booked out for 6 weeks at least in advance. You know, and the pressure is on them to not let people down. So if they're feeling fatigued or feeling unwell, the internal pressure there doesn't come from us. The internal pressure there is to turn up, you know, show up and be a great psychologist for their clients, when, you know, the natural instinct really is to pull back and have a rest, but they feel that they can't. So I think that we all as mental health professionals have to take responsibility for our own self-care in that regard too. But I think that translates to most working life. For us, it's perhaps a bit pronounced because it's individual bookings, you know, throughout the day, and it's very hard to reschedule. But I think we can all make those analogies, whatever sector we work in, around the pressures that we face at work. And not to show, and that pressure not to show that we need downtime, because there's a bit of stigma around that as well. I think, you know, you don't want to be seen as lazy or shirking your responsibilities, or that there's something wrong with you or whatever. Yeah, a lot of pressure.
Thanks for your insight and your words of wisdom, Dr. Tess Crawley, buddy, psychologist, clinical psychologist, forensic psychologist. One day I'll actually come by and we'll actually see each other. Well, I think we are seeing each other soon.
We are, yeah, not long, about a month. We'll catch up.
Thanks
Take care, Val. Thanks for having me. Bye.
It's been a pleasure. Bye.